Hey, welcome back. We're going to look at some double bevel knives today and especially talk about asymmetrically ground knives. So we're going to be doing a little bit of sharpening, and I got the Tucker Zakushi 1200 blue marble stone out. I've been soaking this, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a treatment with this diamond flattener here to raise a little bit of slurry. That's going to make the stone much quicker cutting, and we also want to keep our stones flat. So way better to keep your stone flat than to get it flat once it goes really far out of true. So there's a lot of reference with Japanese knives to the asymmetrical edges that are put on them quite often. So it's not uncommon for Japanese knives to be right-hand biased. Sorry, lefties. There are lefty knives made as well, but more often than not, you will find that knives come from the factory with a right-hand biased edge. So if you're right-handed, like I am here, I'm holding this with my right hand. This is the outside, so the part of the blade away from your body or on the knuckle side. The palm side, or the part that's closer to your body while you're working, is the inside. On an asymmetrically ground knife, for right hand use, it will be ground on the right hand outside. If this was a lefty, then it would be ground on the lefty outside. These are ground on both sides, but one side has more bevel than the other. So you can kind of see here in the reflection that one bevel, this one here, is a bit wider than this side. And if that were the only part of the knife that was right-hand biased, that would be easy for us to manipulate through sharpening. If we wanted to make this knife symmetrically ground, then we would just work more on this side. If, on the other hand, we wanted to make it more right-hand biased, then we would just work more on this outside. However, there is one feature to these knives that also needs to be taken into consideration, and that's the grind on the face of the blade. Is it symmetrical? So is it shaped evenly like so? Or is it asymmetrical with a flatter inside and a more convex outside? You can take a look at the choil to see this quite often. So this spot right here, if we're able to get that in focus, you can look at that and see, is it more curved on one side and flatter on the other? And we can also put something that's flat on the side of the blade and look for a little gap. And this little Nagura will help us here. We can kind of see a little bit of a gap there. The contact with the Nagura and the blade is up at the spine. Now we're making an assumption that this is flat, but it's flat. And we can see that is the gap on the outside. And now, let's see what's happening on this side. And there's a little gap, but not quite as much. So that lets us know this knife has more convexity on the outside than the inside, making the whole thing more right-hand biased. So the pros and cons of having a more right-hand biased knife, if you're right-handed at least, is that when you're doing fine work, it's going to line up your edge closer to what you're cutting. So if we were to pretend that this Nagura is an item of food that we're going to be cutting, and that this is actually a cutting board, not a stone, don't cut on stones, then we'd find that this knife is lining up really evenly against what we're cutting and allowing us to do fine work really easily. Conversely, if we're doing big work, the knife wants to kind of trace a little bit of a curve while we're working. So if you're cutting something really large, like a melon or a big cabbage or something like that, and you want to get a really thin slice, then you might need to kind of curve the knife the opposite direction that it wants to pitch towards. For sharpening, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to work on the outside. Clean off our slurry. Dry the blade. We want to have a nice dry blade. So I'm switching hands. I will be now controlling the work with my right hand, still from the blade, and the job of my left hand that's now holding the handle will be just to keep the angle solid. If you want to check out more of this technique, we have some other videos on that style of double bevel sharpening. But now I'm working on the inside. And now if I wanted to keep this very, very right-handed, I would do very little work with this hand. And that would emphasize the width of the bevel on this side more than this side. Pretty straightforward. This is a medium stone. This knife isn't finished, but just to give you an idea of the technique here, that's the general idea here. So this Honeski Kaku, this little poultry knife, is also a double bevel knife, but it's very, very, very right-hand biased. So it's even more convex. How are we catching that? On the outside and flatter on the inside. So this knife is excessively right-handed. If you're a lefty and you're using this, it would really feel off. The idea here is that this flat inside can be used to glide along like a chicken thigh to remove meat from the bone without digging into the blade. Now, this knife is meant for both fine work and for tough work. So this knife is one that is going to hit bones, whereas our chef's knife has no business on bones. So let's take a look at what considerations we would need to make for this guy with that kind of work. I'm starting with the same general angle that I would work the gyuto at. And I'm going to be doing the broad majority of the work with this hand here. So way more work happens on the outside than with the opposite hand on the inside. Carbon steel is great because it really lets you know right away where did you remove metal and where didn't you, because, you know, patina versus no patina. Now, I'm going to do this until I get a little bit of burr. If this knife was really significantly dull and I didn't get my burr up within a few minutes, then I would definitely want to go to a coarse stone. You know, having a coarse stone can really help. You don't want to spend 30 minutes on a stone like this getting your burr up. And the burr is a little flange of metal that forms on the edge when we create two intersecting angles. So I got a burr. Now, if I were to sharpen this like I had the chef's knife, like I did the chef's knife, the angle on this side would be down here. But I'm going to tip this way up to about twice that angle and sharpen this inside at a much steeper angle. From our experience and from all the feedback from cooks that are using these at work, having this little steeper angle here really extends the edge life of this knife. But don't overdo it. You don't want to go too far and make this inside wide like this outside. So we want to preserve the geometry of this knife by not overdoing this side, but by doing this extra steep angle here, we really get a much tougher edge, and chips and premature dulling are really kept to a minimum. The kinds of finishes that we would look at with these two knives might be pretty different as well. So while we got them here, it's just a great time to talk about edges and what kind of edge is appropriate. So you might not always want to choose your edge by the steel you're working with. These are both the same steel. However, this chef's knife is going to be a bit more of a vegetable and boneless protein kind of knife, and a much finer finish will really benefit that kind of work. Whereas this guy working on butchery needs a lot more tooth in the edge. So I might not finish this as fine. We'll get much longer edge life out of this one if we finish it at, say, 2 to 4,000, and this one will do great at 4 to 8,000. 8 might be too fine, but that's up to you as a user of, you know, what kind of finish you like. If you were looking at kind of doing some experiments, you can, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole as well, you can look at doing a little bit of a finer finish on the inside than the outside as well. So see what that gets you. Keep the outside of this guy nice and bitey though, so don't over polish it. So hopefully that helps explain a little bit of geometry and what is really behind that 60-40, 80-20, 50-50 business. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you again for some more sharpening.